Hi, I'm Kimberly from the Country Bookshop. I'll say a little bit about the Country Bookshop, introduce our guest, Katrina Denza, and move forward with our conversation about Burner. The Country Bookshop is located in Southern Pines, North Carolina. We are a bookstore, all new books. About a third of our store is a children's bookstore. We bring authors into schools across the state, work with nonprofits to get books in kids' hands, and are a destination for locals, people from our surrounding counties, and visitors from much further away. Many people find us on day trips to Southern Pines or on visits to friends who live nearby, and we love serving you in the store, but also on your return home through our website and our audiobook arm, Libro FM. We love being in the town where the North Carolina Literary Hall of Fame is located, just up the hill from our store at the Weymouth Center for the Arts and Humanities, where Katrina was a longtime board member and revitalized the Writers in Residence program there. The Country Bookshop is approaching our 75th anniversary, and for the last 15 years has been a part of the Pilot newspaper, our local newspaper that is nationally recognized as a leader in delivering community journalism and also a part of a statewide media company that specializes in magazines across North Carolina. We exist to serve our community and to shepherd ideas and books across this great state. And my name is Kimberly Daniels Taws, and I've run the bookshop for 15 years. And I am here to speak today with Katrina Denza, a customer for all those 15 years I've been at the bookshop. Throughout that time, her stories have appeared in Nelle, Slippery Elm, and Jabberwock Review, among other places. Her work has received a scholarship from the Bread Loaf Writers Conference and a fellowship from the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. We are here today to talk about her debut story collection, Burner and Other Stories, which was published this past November by Cornerstone Press as a part of their Legacy series. As I mentioned, from 2015 to 2021, she served as chair of the Writers in Residence program for the Weymouth Center of the Arts and Humanities. So thank you for chatting with me again about this.
Well, thank you, Kimberly, for inviting me. And yeah, I love the Country Bookshop. It is my number one bookshop. And I love that it's open still all these years later. It's been a long time staple for our town. And I'm so appreciative of it and of your stewardship of it.
Oh, well, I mean, I'm just lucky to work there and that people shop there because it's the only way I get to do my job. But one of my favorite things about the job is conversation like this. And the first time we chatted was at Weymouth, and it was quite the event. It was like a sold out house. It was standing room only. We sold out of books. And I mean, I cried, which I don't do, but that was 2 months ago. So how has your relationship to the collection changed since then, or has it at all?
That's a good question. As I do these types of talks, and I haven't done very many yet, but I get it's always wonderful to get feedback from readers. It's sort of a myopic project to take on. As I worked on this collection for about 3 years, give or take, and maybe shared with one or two other readers here and there. So I had my own ideas of what these stories meant or represented, but I've been pleased and surprised by what readers bring to me and what their take is on some of the things in the stories. And there's been some really astute like people have caught things that even I haven't caught, which is so fun, the little I don't know what Easter eggs, that I didn't mean to leave, but they have found them somehow. So it's been interesting.
I love that you come to that interaction with pleasure, because that's such a treat for the reader. And um, I'm wondering, since this conversation is so much for for book clubs who might be used to novels as opposed to short stories. How do you think we should talk about short stories differently than novels, or do we need to?
That's a really great question. I think what short stories can offer, other than the brevity, which actually is a big deal, as things pull us this way and that, one reader responded by saying that he liked to read one story a night before he went to bed. Um, so that is an option. It's a definitive end, perhaps a more definitive end than a chapter is. And so in that way, if you have the patience to read one story at a time, it can be very rewarding. And you can also read your novel too at the same time. You don't have to read this collection all the way through, but you certainly can. Um, Also, the expectation of a short story, at least when I read short stories, everything sort of had, it still needs an arc. It can't just be an anecdote. There needs to be some development in the character, or maybe your point is there was no character development. But, the sorts of things that we think about writing novels still apply to short stories, with a lot of the fat trimmed away, so to speak. And we have to accomplish those things as writers in fewer pages. So I think you get trained to do that over time if you study short stories, or if that's what you enjoy writing and reading. Um, I'm probably way off topic here, but I think the expectation of a story, I think you can have different expectations than you necessarily would a novel. Um, I did have one reader ask why one of my, or why a few of my characters were unlikable. But that's a legit question, and it is a common question actually. And I find unlikable people interesting. Not everyone does, but and so I like to read about unlikable characters, even in lengthy novels. So I think you can have an unlikable character. Well, think about in Nabokov's Lolita. He wasn't exactly likable, but that book many consider genius. Um, so yeah, I think with short stories though, you may find more unlikable stories than in novels, or unlikable characters than you do in novels. I don't know. I
Do you
don't
think
know.
that's because the writer doesn't have to hang out with them for as long?
I think that's a good point. I I suspect, and maybe this is part of why I do it. There's unlikability in all of us, I would hope, if you're human at all. And if you've ever made mistakes. And I think the exploration of making mistakes and seeing what happens afterward, I think that's fun for me as a writer. And it's also fun for me as a reader.
I two things come to mind immediately in Burner. One is in Jungle, um, specifically here in the jungle, and then also um, jumping ahead to one of the great things about Iris and Dan. And let's 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 talk about Iris and Dan. How and when did you start writing about them, and what intrigues you about them?
So Iris, more than Dan, perhaps, but Dan is a great I don't know, he's the good cop, I guess, as far as the two when it comes to their parenting. Um, Iris, I was, I don't know. Intuitively, I wanted to write about a mother-daughter relationship that wasn't perfect and how to come back from that. And if a mom could come back from it, knowing she's aware that she made mistakes, she's still a little defensive, but she's aware of the mistakes she made. And I think as mothers, as our children age, we do look back and, we do the best we can. And we're not all perfect. Um, and so I wanted to touch on that a little bit and maybe connect, excuse me, to other mothers who, were struggling a little bit with decisions they made or relationships with their children. And also she is of the time in which, she's not that old in the first story, but she's still of the time she was brought up that if you were female, you were quiet and you were polite and you didn't speak up. And, to confront her daughter's teacher, the idea of it was mortifying to her because she's of a different time. I think I would have no issue, saying, excuse me, this happened and there needs to be consequences. But for her, she had to work with him. There were different things going through her mind because she was of the time, not to excuse it, and she doesn't excuse it even. But
It's interesting because you have two stories about Iris in the collection and the growth of her relationship with her daughter, as we talk about unlikable characters and how they can recover and evolve. And so much of it happens, not you're not writing it, it's happening off the page, which I love. But what I find really interesting is also being able to watch as her relationship with her daughter progresses. It seems like her relationship with herself and her own creative work progresses. Is that something you see intertwined as characters
absolutely.
or resolution? Can you talk about?
Yeah, I think for a lot of artists, maybe specifically Iris, I think that relationship to her daughter was always a little strained once her daughter became a teenager. But I think the strain of that affected her own creativity. One of the reasons she gives for not painting was that she was a teacher and she didn't have time. But as her daughter grew older, that was really not a truthful excuse because, her daughter was in school and then, after school could be more independent, there was really no reason why Iris couldn't have painted. I think as she developed a better relationship with her daughter, she developed a better relationship with herself as an artist and gave herself permission again.
um One of the things that I also find interesting about the craft of how you write Iris and Dan is just, and when we were talking about looking at short stories differently, I think one of the beautiful things for book clubs is it does train when talking, it trains your eyes to the tricks that are the same as in a novel.
Mhm.
So it's you get to see the trees a little bit easier than the forest. But can you talk about writing the if I found it interesting the way you write the internal life of a couple and how you in those two short stories you do such a good job of writing them as a unit, kind of as their own individual self, the same way you might write a character in and of themselves. Can you talk about that a little bit? I can.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is intuitive, but I will say that they did show up as a strong unit. They don't have a perfect marriage, but they've they're forgiving of each other. And I think, and I hope that shows on the page that Dan is fully aware that Iris was not the she was a bit forbidding as a mother in some ways, and he is fully aware, but he loves her, and it didn't faze him. He picked up where she left off as far as caring for their daughter. And he became emotionally supportive when Iris, for whatever reason, felt she couldn't. And through the years, they've had their disagreements, but I wanted to show them, right from the beginning, the opening of the first story, they're standing there with cups of coffee, looking at what the neighbor is doing in the next yard together as a team. And, even in the second story, as Iris is fully disappointed in discovering that, her show, her art was not what she thought it would be, he's right there with her, at the end. Um, so yeah, I can't speak to how it happened necessarily, but I did want them to show a working marriage, a realistic working marriage.
One of the things that struck me about how just in because looking at it in the collection is what they choose to share with each other opposed to in all the characters in your other stories who are uh you know what they're thinking, you know what they're saying, it's far away, and within you can see how that unit is maintained, kind of contrasting them in a way, which is fun. But it's the when we talked to I mentioned earlier about the blank spaces, Iris's progression with her daughter is
Mhm.
off the page, but you do that kind of throughout all the stories, the details you leave off the page, and um, they're very powerful because they're missing. And I'm wondering, can you talk about what you choose not to say? And are these things you've written and then take out because have you done the act of writing and delete them out because the story itself is more powerful, or are you just how does it work? Because your I guess our friend Denise would call it the negative space is so powerful.
Yeah. So in the story, uh, I'm blanking on it. The one set in Rome,
That one is you could be my daughter. That one is
no danger here.
no
No.
danger. Yes, I love it.
Okay. So that story was once a 7,000 word story. And I workshopped it at Sewanee Writers Conference. And I had Christine Scott as faculty. She is an amazing writer, very, very spare. And, I had a whole, in that story, I told how the character's husband and child died. And, I had a whole like tour of Rome and all of that. And, something that Christine Scott said to me that for that story really clicked. It doesn't always work for me, but to start a story as close to the end as possible.
Hmm.
Uh, and what I learned by doing that and by deleting a lot of the story was that what I thought my character wanted wasn't at all what she wanted. So, without giving it away, I think the reader can learn what she really wants. She goes to Rome with a man and his daughter, and this is a semi-romantic relationship. And I say semi because the character, my main character, has issues around, loosening up and giving herself to another person after tragic loss. But it was really interesting for me as a writer to discover what she was really missing
Mm.
was more important to her on that trip.
Why why is that story told from and I think I'm getting this from her that's first person.
Yes.
There are
Yeah,
only two that are first person. And
right.
why is that one first person?
I, you know, there isn't any other reason other than I tried it in third.
Mhm.
And I found then when I switched to first, and sometimes I'll do that, if a character isn't talking to me in third person, I'll switch to first. And sometimes I'll switch it back to third after I've gleaned important information. Like writing in first person can be a bit like interviewing a character.
Mhm.
Get that much more into the character's head that way. Um, but I decided to leave it in first. I liked the spareness of it. Um, I felt that maybe we could get a better sense of where she was emotionally and mentally through first rather than third, rather being told. I was I was hoping that she could show us, and I hope it worked.
It totally worked. That one more a couple others, but and I love hearing how it's went from 7,000 with all this writing to what it is now as she reveals her past life and tragedy that she's kept hidden. It reminds me of like a tapestry that then is pinned to the wall with little one sentence details that then kind of gives it, and it's really um wonderful. One of the things that, and I guess this is just writing in general, but your characters, I love how you write what they are paying attention to, and you kind of take what a character might be thinking and noticing, versus what they're saying. When you're writing, you said you go back and forth from perspective to reveal a character. Are you when you are crafting, are you using certain techniques to reveal? Do you have favorite techniques to reveal parts of the character?
Um, yes and no. So I am unfortunately an inefficient writer in that I will draft, I'll throw spaghetti at the wall with the first draft and then revise time after time after time again, usually starting from scratch. I'll reference an earlier draft and rewrite the whole thing. But by rewriting, then I can add in details that I can make the piece richer and then take out the unnecessary later. As far as for characters, one trick is, if I'm in a scene, I will interview that character, or I will then use first person even briefly to be able to take note of what is important to that character in the scene. Um,
Tell me more. Like, so for um Willful Beasts, for example, uh how how did you play with our character there?
yeah, and again, that started out as um, third person. in one iteration. And then I decided because, you know, she's 17, I decided to have a youthful perspective. I wanted it to be from her perspective. I wanted there to be some agency from her rather than someone telling the story of a 17-year-old, because to her, agency is really important.
Mhm.
Um, but I can't say that the decisions I made for her were necessarily deliberate. Yeah, I did spend time as a teenager with horses. So for that, hopefully my memory served me right. It's been a long time, but for that, that was personal, but that's where the personal ended. You know, Thankfully I didn't have cell phones back then or, any of the nonsense our kids have to deal with today. So that was pure fiction.
Well, I love that story.
Thank you.
Um, in that story, what's beautiful about that perspective is she sees herself as an artist, and it completely transforms what that story is about. Her perspective of herself as an artist and having that agency would have been completely different had you written it the other way. I asked you a little bit about this before, but so many of your characters are artists, or there's art flowing through the stories and connecting them. And um, it's easy to read in a lot of Easter eggs, but and that's the fun part about discussing this book. But for you, can you talk about why there is so much art? What the role of an artist in society is, how art functions in your life as a word artist, as I think of writers, or you have a lot of visual artists in your writing. Uh,
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think art can, in a very similar way as literature, it can evoke empathy in the viewer. And from a viewer's perspective, for instance, when I saw a Monet in North Carolina Museum of Art a few years ago, I stood in front of a Monet and just started crying. It was just so beautiful. I think art is powerful, and it's powerful medicine. It's powerful as a connector. Um, and often art it's not as valued necessarily in society, at least in this, maybe here in the States, as it probably should be, or could be. And so I'm always sort of saying, look at what these people are trying to say or show with their art. And particularly female artists. Women are often invisible, even more so as they age. And, I want my characters to be able to say, here I am, here's my work, look at it. This is my part of the conversation of being human. Um, yeah.
it's interesting because our budding artist in Willful Beasts has one photo of the inside of her mouth, and then an artist who is an artist paintings are that are auctioned off in another story, Tell Me What to Do, also has a series of uh, photos or paintings, I don't remember, of the inside of her mouth that one character doesn't understand, and um, another character, it's obvious. And so you have all these layers of meaning and understanding versus who wants to understand, who can understand, and why
Mhm.
not. what about the inside of of the mouth? What inspired that? What intrigues you about that?
So
Uh,
that's funny. That's the Easter egg another reader found in when I talked to a workshop, which is wild. It was totally intuitive. But if you ask me now, I'll say, what is not being said? What is being held back? What needs to be said? That's probably, what do as women do we keep inside? Because I'm pretty sure both of those characters, both of the artists were women, young women, the young woman and then the older woman. And so that's probably what that was about.
it's interesting because to me, Burner, your title story and the first story in the book, as it ends, um, it ends with her being able to own her own voice, and it seems like a theme throughout your book, or throughout your collection in multiple stories. You mentioned aging, and as you age, you have women of all different ages in the book, and um, but it's interesting to customers who've read the book and come back and chat about it, which is fun to me, especially because it's your store. Um, but uh, older women in the book, and how you write about aging, how you write about sex as it evolves with aging in a relationship. And what kind of feedback what were you trying to explore, or what kind of have you enjoyed or been surprised about the feedback around that?
My first reader would sort of tease me about the amount of sex I had in these stories, but I made sure that in each story it wasn't gratuitous, that there was a reason for it, and whether to show intimacy, whether to show the lack of intimacy, like in Burner. I don't think that was successful. Um, but sex is a very big part of our lives, and it doesn't have to end at a certain age. And I just wanted to show that women don't become suddenly invisible and sexless after the age of 40 or 50 or 60. We can go on creating and being alive.
It's so true. It's so interesting to hear you say that. My mind goes back to this. I did a talk with an author who had written about Ben Franklin, and just kind of went through all of his writings. But Ben Franklin writes about how you should only take lovers over the age of 40 because they're the best.
Right.
Uh,
Certainly more interesting. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Well, I think it's interesting to me because it's just another tool almost to be super economical, and as a craft tool, you can get to the true essence of a character in very few words when you write one sentence about how they are in bed. I mean, you don't have to write five
No.
chapters. You can write one sentence that they use porn as an instruction manual for
Right.
you you get volumes from that one sentence.
Hopefully. Yeah. Yes. I just hope I never end up. I don't know if they still do it, but there was the year's worst sex scenes. Like the best American stories. There was the
Uh,
year's worst sex scenes. I hope I never end up on that list.
Well, but you give us lots of blank space, which is the best
But,
part.
but,
Let's you give
right,
us
right.
just enough to paint in our minds. And
Good.
another story. So, and this was my first question, but I jumped ahead because your final story is These Dark Woods. And how is that story different than the other stories, and how does it relate to them?
Yeah, so that story actually that came to me after a residency in Vermont that I took. I was walking in the woods there. They have a wonderful rail trail up there, and I often walk in the woods here. Um, that story came to me in a rush. Like I sat down and drafted it probably within 2 hours. And it's not a very long story, but I might have revised it 5 times tops. And I took the advice from Darianne Lux to, to add to it. I grabbed different nouns and verbs from various books and like maybe 5 or 6. One of them was polar bear. And I thought, okay, it's a constraint that sort of loosened me up to add to the story. Um, and I think that was the most fun to write for sure. I will say it's to me that last line, here is the woman, or the last 2 lines, here is her light, I hope sums up the whole collection. Like, here we are, you can't ignore us, and we're strong and we're confident. And that's what I hope. And I can't say when I wrote that story, I had that in mind, but it really seemed to fit at the end of the collection. It seemed to be its place.
I think so too, and I think so many of the characters in the different stories are moving towards their light. It's a
Mhm.
process of to your point earlier, it's a process of becoming. And also one of the things that struck me when she's talking about her relationship, it's how different it is from all the others. She's referring to her lover, and even just the term itself, how different that is and what that means. She's into her light.
Yeah. Yes. And, he's the prude in that relationship. He doesn't like to hear swear words and, things like that. So that was a lot of fun. That her character was a lot of fun. And to be sort of not to be weird, but she showed me who she was right away.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, but also, that whole idea of walking in the woods alone as a woman has come up to me many, many years. As a kid, I was 8 years old, walking in the woods by myself. I mean, this is in the 70s, so totally, that's what everyone did. I never thought about it. And then, you
Back
know,
when people were actually abducted, as opposed to today when it's so rare, but it
right,
was so scary.
right, I know. But nowadays, I do unfortunately think about, is this going to be a bad day in that way, But I walk anyway. And I hope that's the point, that people can take away. Yet, yes, it's a risk. And actually, I wrote that story before the whole would you rather meet a man or a bear in the woods joke came out. My story was written first, but it kind of fits, doesn't it? Like polar bear or this guy, I don't know. But some people have said, well, like a couple of the editors before it was taken by someone else, they said, well, the end is ambiguous, or I'd like to see some concrete answer as to what happens. But I didn't want that to be the focal point. I wanted in her head what was going on in her head and also outside. Like I wanted the reader to come away with an overview
Hmm.
of her in the woods confronting this person, and here she is in her light.
Hmm.
That's what I wanted.
That's how it felt to me. I thought it's a beautiful way to end. But it's interesting we talk about the fear. I love how you mentioned the fear, like it came on to her as
Mhm.
opposed. And Iris when she's reflecting on young motherhood, she kind of talks about the fear and coming on to her as opposed to, and I like how you reference fear in that way. It's not something that grows out of you, it's something you put upon. Um,
You know what's interesting? I've started the humongous job of reading Sartre and his being and nothingness. And one of the things, and it's a very slow read, but one of the things that I came away with that was like mind blowing to me was the idea of fear. The fear is an something acted upon a person, acted upon a man, whereas anguish is within, and it's a man's or woman's concern over not being able to handle situations. So, in other words, you know, there's a difference between I fear something or I'm anguished because I'm not sure I can handle. Do you know what I'm saying?
yes, yes.
Yeah. And so I wonder, maybe Iris felt more the anguish, and maybe, my end character was fully confident and so therefore, was facing fear, something that
Right.
could very well happen to her.
And I feel like holding fear almost as a separate ball outside of her and punting it, choosing to
Right, right. Hmm.
and, and quickly referencing, all of the moments she's of experience she's gathered to be able to punt fear
Hmm.
away versus Irish, who is still moving through that growth in a way.
Right.
What made you come to Sartre? I mean, you lead with a Simone de Beauvoir
Oh,
quote. Is
right,
that
right.
what brought you to?
No, actually, and I haven't finished hers. So she will be next.
I have it like right over there. It is
Yep.
slow going, and the font.
Yep.
I love the New Penguin translation that we have at the bookshop. I really love it, but it's the font is
Yes.
difficult for me. But
Yeah.
I'm plowing through.
So my son, he's like, Mom, you got to read Sartre. It's like, okay, I'm on it.
What did he say? What was his uh, Katrina's son? I have watched grow and admire greatly for a variety of reasons. But what spoke to him about it?
Well, he read it very quickly for a class of his, but he is a proponent of, Mom, you've got to read more philosophy. The more philosophy you can read, and actually I do understand that
Mhm.
because it does inform the way I view things, which will eventually make it onto a page.
Most definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm not, I'm not, I'm taking it slow.
Well, it's a lot to take in. I love, well, that's exciting for me to know. You should check our philosophy section out. It's
Oh,
growing.
I will. I
Uh-huh.
will.
Mary always
Yeah.
gets irritated when I get, not irritated. You can always know when I'm into something. But in that our the woman, as you call her in that last story, you were talking about walking, and the woman, she walks to make space in her head for inspiration, and you say for creativity to grace her or give her the finger, whichever it's inclined to do. How do you think about creativity? Do you think of it similarly to fear as something that is external that comes to you, or
Interesting.
um what's your understanding of it?
So the walking part is important because walking is motion. Um, I think, sure, creativity can sort of be that way, show up or not show up, but the woman is part of her own process by calling it forth. And I know walking is a huge part of my writing process. And in fact, when I'm writing stories or a novel, I'll go into the woods and ideas will come to me and I'll stop whatever I'm doing and I'll take a note on my phone. I don't have pen and paper with me, but I have my phone. And one time I did that and I was writing, 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 and I looked up and I had totally forgotten I was in the woods. So, yeah, it's part of my own process. So I guess it just became hers too.
I love that. I love that. What is it that you love about writing?
I've loved writing since I was a kid. And, my parents were readers. And so we had books in the house, and I always had books. My parents bought books for me, but also my school librarian would break the rules and let me take home five or six because she knew I would devour them and bring them right back. Um, and I wrote stories as a kid. What do I love about it? The conversation, the exploration involved in reading and writing, um, connections, empathy. I think reading is really important to develop empathy. And I think empathy is so, so important, especially now.
I think that it's so one of the reasons I love your writing is its ability to evoke feelings, to hit on so many different feelings. Also it's however many you've written however many different worlds in here. So we have the opportunity to hit quite a few feelings. And as you're talking about writing's power to create empathy, how do you think the responsibility of artists, writers, thinkers um, has evolved over time? And as you have had a lifetime of engaging
Mhm.
with this or valuing this, how has it evolved over your life, whether through your age or through the time that you are living in, or how has
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think literature has always been powerful and it continues to be powerful. So in that way, I don't see a lot of change. I might see some change in styles or, postmodernism versus this or that, speculative, different genres. But I still think it's brave. I still think that writers take risks, particularly the really good writers take risks and show up on the page as honestly as possible. Um, I think as long as we continue to do that, we'll still have an ongoing conversation. You know, um, James Joyce was a brilliant writer, Faulkner, all of the greats. And we have greats now working today. And we will in the future. And I fully believe that. Yeah.
I got distracted with my questions, taking notes. Um, but you mentioned that the being at Swanee and really workshopping one there. We talked about your involvement in shaping the Weymouth Writers in Residence program. Can you talk about uh, what retreats have been to you and what they mean and how writing functions as a community and as a solitary thing for you?
Yeah. So to take the first part, the retreats, um, I remember Teresa Ann Fowler doing a reading for the Country Bookshop, and we met there for the first time. Brilliant,
That was
brilliant writer.
Exposure, right? Her
Yes,
first that
brilliant.
I loved that book.
And then she later. emailed me and said, "Hey, Kat, I'm at Weymouth Center. I really think you should check this place out. It's close to you, but come on over. I want to show you what it's all about." And she did. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. Writers get to stay, and just focus on their work. At the time, my younger son was in school. And, I was very busy with volunteering for things for him. So it looked like, wow, that would be amazing. And so 2014, I did my first residency there. And it really is, even if a writer doesn't have kids still in the house, or just the permission to go and stay in a place and just focus on your work and feeding yourself is immensely helpful. So Weymouth was my first residency, and then Vermont Studio Center was great. And then Virginia Center for the Creative Arts is another dear one to me. I just love that place. And so I'll be able to go this summer and spend some time in Virginia and just focus on my next book. So that's the retreat kind of thing, and very important for writers at any stage, in their writing, to just give themselves permission to just focus. And what was the other part of your question?
Uh, how does writing function as a solitary endeavor and a community endeavor on the writing side, separate from, you know,
Yeah.
w where I enter the picture, which is book selling and readers, not
Mhm.
not that side, but the
Yeah,
writing.
I mean, I do think you do need solitary time. I need it. I can't speak for everyone. I need it to focus, to dig down deep. But I think I said to you once before, I also can't write from a vacuum. I need to be connected to my people, my community. I need to be of some sort of service. Um, in order to feel full, and to then be able to take that fullness and lend it to a page, if you know what I mean. So if I were to just do nothing but write, oof, I really shudder to think what might come out of that. It might be boring. I don't know. But yeah, I hope I'm finding a good balance. I can spend some time focusing, but also spend some time with my friends, with creating with other people. We have so many creative people in this town. It's like mind blowing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I feed off of that energy, and I hope they feed off of mine. And it's great. I love this town.
I think it's so exciting, and I think your collection is so exciting. And since I've been handing it to book clubs, I think there's a lot of opportunity um, for book clubs, and I love the way you explore technology. I love the way you carry hope through different people's lives, and I really love the way we just get to sit inside people's heads. And I'm so excited. You've said that you are working on a novel. You've just mentioned it again. Um, I can't wait to see you do this on a larger scale, just for a personal treat. But what can you talk a little bit about how you decided to switch mediums and when and what
Mhm.
and more if you're willing to share?
Oh, yeah. Well, since the pandemic, I've had two novel ideas as well as Burner. So started Burner. I also have another short story collection that is drafted but not revised. But my goal is to have a draft of a novel next
Mhm.
before I revise anything. Um, I have time. So that I feel as I hope I have time, but I am excited about one novel. I'm excited about both of them, but one in particular. And I just want to get started on it. And yeah, I've written a linear novel before. It will never see the light of day. It just won't. But it was good practice. And I know I can do it. So I'm not just the short story writer, although I would be fine with being just a short story writer. I love short stories. As you know, I love to buy short stories and read them.
Do you think that having Burner out in the world and gone through this process of publishing um, has changed how you think about what you want to do or how you're doing it?
Definitely. Definitely. Because I think for many, many years, I've written about 30 odd short stories that have been published in journals before I wrote the stories in Burner. And I had a novel in stories at one point, enough for another collection. It wasn't the right time for those, and they didn't speak, in my mind, they didn't speak to contemporary issues the way the stories in Burner do. And so I'm glad I waited, but I feel like I don't have to wait anymore. That I'm happy with that being my first book. And now I can just keep exploring and keep writing.
Well, that makes me very excited for readers everywhere.
Oh,
But it really, I mean, it really does. I love Burner, and that makes sense because it does speak to now, and it speaks to uh, you know, all the different ways one can be a feminist and doubt oneself and all the different ways we can all step into our light. And we have one last minute here. But is there anything that we didn't cover or that you would like to um, say or include or say to people who are reading your book or direction for people as they're talking about your book and considering it?
well, what I want to say most is thank you. Thank you for picking it up. Thank you for reading. Thank you for considering reading it. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful that you are part of the conversation and that you're willing to be part of the conversation. And I'm open to any questions. I can be emailed, if you have any questions or even comments. If you want to say, I hated all your characters, I'm cool with that. I'm totally cool with that. And to you, Kimberly, thank you so much for championing this book. That means the world to me.
I mean, I love it. I kept crying. I
Oh,
love it so much. I kept crying about it. And we had to try this again to just get through it. And I
so
think part of that is watching you create and seeing you in multi, and that's the beauty of a community is you get to see people um in their light, and I have it's very fun for me. So
wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Mwah.
I
Bye.